Let's start with a few biblical verses from Genesis. Both the man and his wife were naked, yet felt no shame. As you may know, this were Adam and Eve prior to the fall, and after they ate from the forbidden tree, this happened. So the Lord God called out to the man and said to him, "Where are you?" And he said, "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." After Adam and Eve ate from the forbidden tree, they hid themselves with leaves. What happened is that they became aware of their nakedness, feeling ashamed about it. And most importantly, they felt judged. God's judgments makes people insecure, and judging in general causes division and exclusion. People form groups and critique external groups. Some people want to belong to groups and fear to be judged. When we feel like we are judged, we feel ashamed or scared. And it is within people their nature to be part of a group, to avoid feeling alone. But are those judgments justified? I'm going to argue via metaethics how moral judgments are rather vacuous. And unlike how agents are making judgments, they are really being judgmental. If you're familiar with metaethics, you can start noticing I'm already referring to an expressivist theory of metaethics. Truth. I don't know what kind of people watch my videos and how knowledgeable they are about this subject, but I believe that information should be accessible to everyone who has an interest in this subject. People deserve to know this, and it keeps the video interesting too, if it is accessible. What I'm going to talk about today isn't too complicated, however. I can understand this, and I'm a layman. Besides that, my metaethics and metaphysics are not even fully worked out yet. That means a few things. One, that this will be incomplete, and two, I might change my mind about what I'm going to talk about today. I considered making a video on this when everything seemed complete, but that would take too long, resulting in long periods of absence on YouTube. You know, I can post videos with incomplete philosophies. It is partially about the journey as well. Then I feared that if I would be showing these incomplete philosophies, others would be taking credit for it and complete it before me. But I was reminded of my lack of fame, and that's okay, but all knowledge I keep for myself would be knowledge that is eventually lost. Besides that, I also apply philosophies from others without referencing them. But enough with the talk, and let's dive into this. From the start, I want to clarify a distinction between the terms facts and truths. Facts, as I like to say, is anything we experience inductively from the actual world, like buildings are facts about reality, trees, grass, and planets are all facts about reality. Facts are not related to claims, propositions, or assertions. These, however, are a matter of truth. Propositions like "I am walking to school" and assertions like 2 + 2 = 4 are concerned with truth, but they may refer to facts. A cognitivism of truth is established when we invent rules. For example, syntax provides us with rules to establish valid sentences. There are rules which need to be followed in order to make well-formed sentences. There are rules in chess, there are rules in mathematics, and a lot more. You might be asking about the metaphysics of these rules, but first, don't some of them not reduce to facts anyway? I might be looking at one M&M on a table and say there's only one. Then I place a second M&M close to the first. Now I can say that 1 + 1 = 2 M&Ms. We have nominalized the properties into numbers. Thus truth doesn't reduce to facts, because properties are not synonymous with numbers. We assign numbers to it. If we have to nominalize facts into truths, then truth transcends facts. To explain the metaphysics of truth, I will take snakes and ladders as a simple example. If you want to know the rules of snakes and ladders, you might look into the manual. There you will find very simple explanations on the rules of the game. Like that I'm allowed to take the number of steps compared to the number I've thrown with my dice. If you want to be more precise on these rules, then the rules actually translate to a vast amount of conditionals. Logic therefore works as a means of inventing truth. Now, if someone were to assert that if you are standing on plane 8 and you are allowed to stay on that plane, we would correct him, telling him it is a false assertion, because there is no conditional stating that. But there is a conditional stating that if you step on plane 8, then you move to plane 4. Obviously, many more subjects contain rules in the form of logic. Syntax has rules such as if it is an independent clause, then it contains one subject first, one verb second, and one object third. Sentences like I like cars are true because they go according to the rules of logic. The remaining sentences are false because they do not follow the rules. If there are no rules, then no sentence would be either valid or invalid. If there are no rules, then sentences like I cars or I like cars wouldn't be either true or false. What are the rules of logic itself, you may ask? Is it logic? That wouldn't be too odd, honestly. Not all rules need to be arbitrary. The laws of physics or the laws of logic are rules, but they are not arbitrary. I've never looked into the philosophy of truth theories before, and because of my ignorance, I'm not risking myself making many mistakes. Anyhow, I think this is pretty adequate, but it is not fully complete yet. I do not believe all truth reduces to rules, however. Also context and facts matters. Now let's consider the correspondence theory of truth. This theory holds that objects serve as truth makers for propositions. For example, the proposition "this house exists" is true because the house objectively exists. I think the correspondence theory of truth does only work to some degree, because I think this will not help us for different subjects. Consider the rules of syntax again. There might be some philosophers who will argue otherwise, but I don't believe there are any objects in the real world which patently show how to construct well-formed sentences. And there are also challenges to this, which I believe you would have to change the course of this to make it consistent again. Let me show you what I mean. Consider this proposition: unicorns don't exist. I think you will agree with me that this proposition is true. Great, so we have a true proposition. But this must be referring to some object in the real world to make it true. Be aware about the fact we are talking about unicorns which do not exist. There is an absence of objects. Then how can this proposition be true if there is no object to make this proposition true? One way you could revive this theory is by declaring a distinction between objectivism and realism. Unicorns are objects, but they aren't real. In this way, however, we are not holding on to a theory like we used to. Objects may just as likely be abstract, but that's a metaphysical inquiry I'm not going to bother with too much here. What I'm trying to show here is that truth seems to be arbitrary. Now, to argue in favor for an anti-realism of morals, moral judgments do not refer to facts, but moral discourse to me does have merit within constructivism. I really like Kant's hypothetical imperative, stating your motivations bring about oughtness. If I want a job, then I ought to study. If I want food, then I ought to buy it with money. Kant's hypothetical imperative will be a topic for another video. If you remember me saying that truth is relative to context, you'll be understanding what I meant with that here. Moral non-cognitivists claim that moral judgments are expressions of emotions and are not truth-apt. Compared to expressive propositions, truth-apt propositions are identified when stated assertorically. Propositions like "close the door" are rhetoric, and their truth or falsity are not meant to be consulted. These judgments express a command. The cat is orange is an assertoric proposition. Judgments like murdering is bad generally express an emotion and are not stated assertorically. You may notice context is required in how we tend to inquire propositions. Error theory holds that moral judgments have a referential failure. But let me first define morality. Moral discourse is generally referred to obligations we ought to follow for no reason other than for the sake of mere obedience. Ayn Rand defines it very neatly in her essay titled Causality versus Duty. An anti-concept is an artificial, unnecessary and rationally unusable term designed to replace and obliterate some legitimate concept. The term duty obliterates more than single concepts. It is a metaphysical and psychological killer. It negates all the essential of a rational view of life and makes them inapplicable to man's actions. The meaning of the term duty is the moral necessity to perform certain actions for no reason other than obedience to some higher authority, without regard to any personal goal, motive, desire, or interest. It is obvious that anti-concept is a product of mysticism, not an abstract derived from reality. In a mystic theory of the ethics, duty stands for the notion that man must obey the dictates of a supernatural authority. Even though the anti-concept has been secularized and the authority of God's will has been ascribed to earthly entities, such as parents, country, state, mankind, etc., their alleged supremacy still rests on nothing but a mystic edict. Who in hell can have the right to claim that sort of submission to or obedience? This is the only proper form and locality for the question, because nothing and no one can have such a right or claim here on earth. If one were to accept it, the anti-concept duty destroys the concept of reality. An uncountable, supernatural power takes precedence over facts and dictates one's actions regardless of context or consequences. Duty destroys reason. It supersedes one's knowledge and judgment, making the process of thinking and judging irrelevant to one's actions. Duty destroys values. It demands that one betray or sacrifice one's highest values for the sake of an inexplicable command, and it transforms values into a threat to one's moral worth, since the experience of pleasure or desire casts doubt on the moral purity of one's motives. Duty destroys love. Who could want to be loved not from inclination but from duty? Duty destroys self-esteem. It leaves no self to be esteemed. Despite her assertion duty destroys values, duties indeed are unrelated to values, but can seem to have the property of being valuable. An example, it is everyone's duty not to murder others. This seems like a valuable duty. Only values will be relative to preference, which is most likely influenced by culture or background. Thus, values, rather than being properties, are stereotypes we assign to duties. Moral judgments should refer to some moral duty. Consider the phlogiston discourse. There are certain properties we assign to the term phlogiston, like phlogiston is combustible, phlogiston is preserved, phlogiston cannot be perceived. But when we cannot find anything that is preserved and combusted when heated, then we say there is a referential failure. You assert something that doesn't exist, therefore their assertion must be false. Same goes for the moral discourse. There is a referential failure when moral duties cannot be found within the natural world. Let's now look into some objections from Inspiring Philosophy's channel.
Non-cognitivists do not think moral claims can be either true or false. Therefore, they lack truth-apt status.
Yes, this description of non-cognitivism will only be valid when agents express moral beliefs, not when agents assert moral beliefs.
Antonio Martirano says of non-cognitivism, It is not possible to talk about disagreement and unsoundness in ethics. Neither is it possible to speak about ethical reasoning, because ethical sentences, such as parsimony is a virtue and parsimony is a vice, are not expressing propositions. That is, they are not true or false. Thus, they cannot be incompatible.
No, we can still be cognitivist about morals when moral claims are asserted. But when we do discuss morality in a truth-apt fashion, then a well-informed non-cognitivist will be an error theorist about such claims.
Remember, if non-cognitivism is true, any moral claim is just an emotion or expression of a non-representational attitude towards the state of affairs of something. So that means anytime I convey an action as virtuous, mean, desirable, terrible, fine, or anything of moral status, under non-cognitivism, I am expressing a different emotion or attitude each time, which according to non-cognitivists could be observed in a different outward expression. However, it seems on reflection that we don't have different non-cognitive states when we make different moral claims. I can be happy over something being beneficial or something being attractive. If each of these is just an expression of attitude or emotion, then what is the difference in the outward expression between these two?
I think he's confusing two different discourses here. Non-cognitivism solely concerns itself with the idea that moral claims are expressions. The difference between these expressions is a quest of values, which belongs to the philosophy of aesthetics. But also remember that we can be a constructivist about morals. Truth doesn't reduce to facts. We can still discuss the truth of morality under Kant's notion of the hypothetical imperative. When we have a scale in values, it doesn't mean that one value is more true than the other.
Bruce Schaeffer-Landau says, if as it seems we convey and mean something slightly different, when we say of an action that is virtuous, right, mandatory, supererogatory, kind, beneficial, admirable, conscientious, attractive, desirable, laudable, saintly, or fine, then non-cognitivists must explain this by citing a different attitude that received expression in each case. But our attitudes don't seem nearly as diverse or fine-grained as the predicates we standardly reply in moral assessments. Cognitivists straightforwardly account for these differences by referring to different meanings, content, or properties that are exemplified when these different assessments are true. Expressivists must either deny that these predicates signify different assessments or identify a different attitude for each predicate. Neither route seems very promising.
The difference between values is again a question which belongs to the philosophy of aesthetics. This is also a question which concerns metaphysics. Non-cognitivists are not nihilists. It is false to believe that non-cognitivists are nihilists about values. Then I believe they are mistaking values and duties as unrelated. Since we ought to do what they consider as moral values, they reduce to duties. Duties can be valuable, of course, but values are not synonymous with moral duties.
It gets even worse when we try to create a formal argument with premises. Consider this. Premise 1, apples are a fruit. Premise 2, if apples are a fruit, apples should be eaten. Therefore, apples should be eaten. The key here is realizing that premise 1 is an assertion, but premise 2 is unasserted, and it is just a conditional. So if we switch these out with moral claims, then we get premise 1, murder is wrong. Premise 2, if murder is wrong, then pressuring someone to commit murder is wrong. Therefore, pressuring someone to commit murder is wrong. Under non-cognitivism, the argument officially becomes invalid, even though intuitively it should be valid. Murder is wrong is an assertion, so is wrong has one meaning. But if murder is wrong is not an assertion, so is wrong has a different meaning. So if is wrong has different meanings from 1 and 2, then the argument is invalid. Premise 1 is a non-cognitive state, like a desire or emotion, which cannot be true or false. Premise 2 is a cognitive statement that can be true or false. So non-cognitivism falls into this odd state that appears to go against the basic features of logic.
When a moral judgment is asserted, of course we can be cognitivist about it, but only when it is asserted. Now, being a cognitivist about moral claims doesn't change the validity of it. According to error theory, The moral claim will be false since it fails to refer. Thus we do not have to be non-cognitivist about moral assertions. As for the problem of making syllogisms, first of all, logic is a different context. If you imply the proposition murder is wrong in a syllogism, then since we're speaking of logic, it will never be an expression but a premise. That's what they're called, premises, not assertions. Then we have an important difference between validity and soundness. The syllogism is valid, which means the conclusion follows from the premises. Yes, any syllogism is valid if the conclusion follows from its premises. Syllogisms like, if unicorns can fly, then they are immortal. Unicorns can fly, therefore unicorns are immortal, are valid arguments despite its absurdity. The argument is unsound, however, because of the absence of unicorns. Likewise, moral arguments can be valid, but are very likely unsound since they fail to refer. The next objection is towards error theory in Inspiring Philosophy's next video. To provide some context before I critique this video, Inspiring Philosophy proposes the argument of moral intuition in favor of moral realism. It basically states we have a cognitive predisposition to argue about morality in a truth-apt fashion, like we all have a tendency to interact with objects and understand our surroundings. For example, we all have a tendency to interact with other creatures. It is within our nature. Just like it is within our nature to talk about morality.
We shouldn't just assume our worldview, but instead be open to the possibility there could be evidence for new facts and properties. Mackie is basically arguing like this. Premise 1. If naturalism and empiricism are likely, then torturing children for fun is not morally wrong. Premise 2. Naturalism and empiricism are likely. Therefore, torturing children for fun is not morally wrong. However, following G.E. Moore, we can employ something that has become known as a Moorean shift. Moore employed this argument against epistemic skeptics, people who believed we cannot know things about the external world. After several arguments, they concluded we cannot know things about the external world. We cannot know if we have two arms, or that the sun is in the sky, etc. Moore thinks if skepticism led to such absurd conclusions, there must be something wrong with skepticism. So he responded like this. Premise 1. I know I have two hands and the sun is in the sky. Premise 2. If skepticism is correct, I cannot know these things. Conclusion. Therefore, there is a problem in the skeptic's reasoning. Many philosophers argue we can apply this reasoning to error theory as well. Premise 1. Torturing children for fun is morally wrong. Premise 2. If error theory is correct, the claim that torturing children for fun is morally wrong would not be true. Conclusion. Therefore, there is a problem with error theory. The argument simply works to reverse Mackie's original argument, and in a sense argues from intuition. Since we know it is morally wrong to do things like torture children, it is more likely there is a problem with error theory, since it would infer such things are not objectively wrong.
Now, Inspiring Philosophy shows error theory must be false since it goes against our intuitions. The mistake here is that the term morality has been equivocated. The notion of morality will be different relative to the type of metaethical doctrine we will be using. Moral realists will usually claim morality are objective duties independent of subjects' reasons and preference. In simple terms, there are obligations to be found in the real world, but they only think this is true because their metaethical philosophy suffices for it. In contrast to different metaethical doctrines, like constructivists, may claim morality is a type of altruism. Notice here that altruism is a mindset compared to obligations, which are command-like. Most error theorists will claim that moral realists are the ones in error, which means there can be no such thing like objective obligations. Of course, there is no error in having an altruistic mindset because altruistic people do not necessarily assert there are moral obligations. Error theorists do not error the existence of our feelings, mindsets, or ideologies. They error our assertions about objective moral duties. Hence, feelings, mindsets, and ideologies exist within the mind. Thus, they are facts, and you cannot error facts. Therefore, error theorists are not wrong when they assert that there is an error within the assertion that torturing children for fun is morally wrong. Error theory doesn't negate the existence of our intuitions about this.
For example, the fact that some medicine would give me many more years of happy life gives me reason or accounts in favor of me taking this medicine.
Not all facts will give us reasons. If you are already well and happy, there will be no reason to take medicine. Thus, reasons will also be relative to context or the agent. Hence, if we have a reason for something, it doesn't follow there will be an obligation. I'm not saying he says this, but I just wanted to clarify this.
The question I want to focus on is, does anything really matter, in the sense that we all have reasons to care about some things for their own sake? In other words, are there any objective normative truths?
Now, earlier I said that these reasons will be relevant relative to context or the agent. Clearly, I am going to disagree with him about this claim for objective normative truths. But let's see what he has to say.
Granted that things like love and happiness are intrinsically good in the sense that we have strong reasons to respond to these things in some positive way. Many of us also believe that some things like irrationality, disability, and pain are intrinsically bad in the sense that we have strong reasons to respond to these things in some negative way. We often use normative concepts to make normative claims that, if true, would be true in an objective sense. Some claim is objectively true if its truth does not depend on the attitudes or responses of any subject. However, some people dissent from these common assumptions and claim that nothing is intrinsically good or intrinsically bad, in the sense that we do not have reasons to care about anything for its own sake. In other words, there are no objective normative truths. If this view were true, then we would have no reason to respond to anything either positively or negatively, because nothing really mattered. All of our normative judgments would be mistaken, or worse, not even mistaken, because they would be merely nonsense.
First, I want to clarify that normative anti-realists are not nihilists about normative truths. Normative nihilists is a subset of the set normative anti-realism, because truths emerge from the contents of minds. It does seem that normative truths will therefore be arbitrary for the normative anti-realist. But normative truth can honestly be very reliable under the constructivist notion. They are very flexible since they are relative to context and agents. Let me explain how this works. If we look at this picture, most will agree the ball is in front of the rock. Now the two entities will have certain properties. The rock has the property of rockiness, the ball has the property of being bouncy, but neither of these entities has the property of being in front of. This is called a relational property and will depend on frame of reference. Therefore, the truth of the proposition the ball is in front of the rock will be relative to the agent. From a different frame of reference, the rock will be in front of the ball. Similarly, an agent will have reasons to respond to love in a positive way. Since we are not nihilists about normative truths, only will these be relative to our needs. For example, let's say you want to get a job. According to Kant's hypothetical imperative, there will be certain requirements first before you can apply for the job. It is a requirement you have an educational background. Thus, you ought to study in order to get the job. The fact that you need the job can be used as a reason to justify the obligation of studying. Let's say you are unhappy. Now you also want to be happy. If you want to be happy, then you ought to take medicine. Wanting to be happy is a reason for taking medicine. But not everyone will be unhappy. Thus, not everyone will have reasons for taking medicine. Notice how reasons are relative to our needs. So does it matter if someone yells at you viciously? That depends on whether or not you want to live peacefully. You may react negatively towards someone's viciousness. There will be reasons for your reaction. For example, you want to live peacefully. These normative judgments would not be mistaken, because we do it for our own sake.
Here's an argument for normative anti-realism. A. If there are any objective normative truths, then there are intrinsic features or properties of some things that give us reasons to care about them for their own sake. B. Nothing could give us reasons to care about anything for its own sake. Therefore, C. There are no objective normative truths. If we accepted the anti-realist conclusion in C, then we could validly infer that D. We have no reason to prefer a life filled with many happy experiences to a life of unrelenting agony. And E. The fact that some argument is valid and has true premises gives us no reason to accept this argument's conclusion.
Well, I have argued against this already. Therefore, we do not have to accept conclusion D. As for conclusion E, now remember I'm only an error theorist about claims which fail to refer to facts. Moral claims to me fail to refer to facts, but claims about facts are not in error since they refer to facts. We don't have to be error theorists about truth. Like I said, truth relies on logic, and the laws of logic are facts. And if I want to know the truth, then I ought to find answers truthfully. Because I want to know the truth, it gives me reasons to accept the conclusion of this argument. We do not need to error mindsets and ideologies, because they do not assert anything. Normative realists assert objective normative facts. Normative anti-realists assert subjective normative truths. Truths which refer to logic and people's attitudes. People's attitudes exist, therefore attitudes are facts and cannot be in error. My need to know the truth is a fact, because this attitude exists. Because it is a fact, we cannot error this proposition. If I need to know the truth, then I ought to find truth adequately. My need to know the truth is a reason for the obligation to find truth adequately. Okay, final words. So what have we learned? Moral judgments are vacuous. So don't worry about a judging God. If God exists, he is only judgmental. This has been one heck of a ride, and this is probably my longest video right now. And I'm not even that knowledgeable about this subject. To be honest, at the end, I didn't really understand anymore what I was saying. But it felt right, so I will let it be. Hence, like I said at the beginning of this video, it is about the journey, and not about me making correct assertions.